Welcome, family. This is another session of Leadership Talks. This is Pastor Barrett Berry. We're joined today for a discussion about Vice President Biden. Who is he going to pick to be his candidate for his running mate? It's a lot of discussion out there. Washington Post recently listed 11 women, no men, 11 women, to be his possible running mates, being Elizabeth Warren, number 2, and Senator Kamala Harris, her counterpart, is number 1 on the Washington Post list of 11. They brought in some other new people as well. Governor of New Mexico, Governor of Michigan. Actually, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus just joined the list as well. She was the former California Senate leader, and something new to the list and brings a lot of questions. But it's a great day to be in politics. But I thought, instead of getting in the bubble of D.C., where I served for a number of years in D.C., and I'm a lifelong Democrat who's now in North Carolina as a pastor. I'm independent on the list as well. Okay, I hear things. But so we're really excited about today, and I want to get outside the bubble to hear from people who aren't necessarily dialed in D.C. within the politics, but to get to the professors and have them use their prowess and their intellect and their wisdom and come from their expertise to talk about some of the issues that are relevant to this discussion, as well as, who should he pick? Let's start with go around the table and introduce them briefly to you. We have Professor Angela Lewis. She's from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. She's a political scientist. I'm intrigued by what she has to say. She studies conservatism in the black community. Really excited about that. She's a graduate of the University of Texas, Knoxville, where she received her PhD. We're enthused. She has a new book out. Maybe she'll talk about that today as well. Really excited to hear what she has to say. And then we have Dr. Cara. I'm gonna ruin this name, DeJongo Moore?
Junko Moore. Kara
Junko Moore. Don't say the D. Come on, I saw the movie. But anyway, work with me. She's at Rhodes College, where she's an assistant professor, and she's in the educational studies program there as well. She's a good friend of ours who had on the show Dr. Charles McKinney, who's over the African American Studies program there, Africana Studies program there. She is. She studied elementary education and psychology, respectively. It's her level of expertise. We're enthused to have her join us today. And then we have Dr. Julia S. Jordan Zachary. She's the chair, chair of the department since 2019, a relatively new post of hers, but she's been in academia. She's done amazing. Her CV is amazing. As a matter of fact, I'm going to copy it and then utilize it as my... No, just playing. But anyway, she's head of the Africana Studies Department there at UNC Charlotte, which is in my town where I am. It's a growing metropolis here in Charlotte, but also the university is growing by leaps and bounds as well, and they got a good football team going on right now. She has a book that's doing very well today. She'll talk to us about that. She specializes in women in politics and the movement thereof. And then we have today, Dr. Arthur Emiker. He's a professor of English at the Chicago State University. He's a poet, and don't you know it as well. He's a Yoruba, starting to be a Yoruba priest, and so he brings a different angle to the discussion today. We're really looking forward to it. You should hear some of his poetry. He's an outstanding poet. You can catch him on his Facebook page and learn more about him there. And then we have the distinguished Professor Lee Jones. We like to call him Obey. He's a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, the Atlanta University Center, in the area where I went to school as well. A brilliant professor. He's over at Western Governors University, and I'm looking forward to what he has to say. He takes a unique take on the political realm. And so here's our panel today. I know that one of us is going to leave shortly, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'll let you all have an opening statement. What's it? Why is it relevant that we discuss who Biden selects as his vice president candidate, his running mate? Who wants to start off? Let's pick Dr. Julia with the pretty smile. Go ahead. You're glowing right there.
I know I should have had a resting face. No. Well, I think that, coming out of the previous elections, where we had, for example, different women running for office, Secretary Clinton, for example, and it not necessarily materializing the way that individuals had imagined that. And given the Me Too movement, given all of these different movements and how they're culminating around race, gender, class, etc., I think it's important as a signal, maybe symbolic, hopefully substantive, that a woman be seriously considered, especially given the demographics, given who votes and how they vote, et cetera. I think it's kind of really important in this moment in time.
Agreed. Dr. Owe.
Well, I like to take my starting point, remember the Sankofa principle. And so if it is truly not a crime to go back and fetch that which we have got, then it makes good sense to go ahead and reach back into some earlier scholars, see how they answer their questions, and then see how we can answer ours. I said all that to say, I'd like to start off thinking about Kwame Ture. Every time you met Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, he would say, "Where is your organization? Where is your organization? Where is your organization?" And we're going to answer the question about who Joe Biden should choose as a running mate. The first thing we have to do is organize ourselves around our agenda items and then proceed from there. Which candidate do we believe as a Black community can choose the appropriate, rather can implement the agenda items?
Okay. All right. Very good. Who wants to go next?
Let me chime in because I think the professor just mentioned some very valuable and important points. In political science, we think about these terms called descriptive and substantive representation. Descriptive representation is simply we have someone in office that looks like us. A substantive representation is where we have people in office that have the same policy goals that we have. And so I think looking at the Black agenda, however you want to define that, is important in choosing which candidate or which person he's going to choose as the nominee or his running mate. And so is it important for us to have someone to look like us as the VP pick, or is it more important to have someone that represents some of those policy objectives of the Black agenda?
I think I would like to echo that.
Go ahead.
I think that was a very nice statement, Dr. Lewis Maddox. And I think people want to get excited about Joe Biden. They want to get excited about the election. And I think without knowing exactly who the vice president pick is, we're not really able to analyze how well Joe Biden's ticket, how well Joe Biden will give us that representation, be it, that representation of having someone who looks like us or shares our values. I think we just really want to, I want to be excited. I want to know who it is so that I can do all the research and figure out what this person, what her background will be, what her experience have been, and see, does she have the same goals that I do? Does she have the same values that I do? What has her education looked like? What has her life been like? I mean, I'm very curious, and I think, once we have this missing piece to, the puzzle, we'll be able to get excited, get really, really excited about Joe Biden, not just excited about voting out the person that is currently holding the office, but getting excited about the person we want to get in there.
So are you saying that we're not excited about the current person who's running?
No, I'm not. I think people are excited about, or I won't even say that excited. People are motivated. Even just looking at, the last couple of primary elections, seeing people waiting in line for hours for a primary election, people are motivated, but I don't know if people are excited. And, since, Barack Obama left office, I don't know if people have been excited to go, to run out to the polls and vote. Yes, people are motivated to vote, but I don't know if people are really excited yet because we just don't have all the information.
Very good. Professor Arthur, do you want to jump in here?
Yes, I think that we've reached a point in our history where we're going through a serious spiritual and cultural shift. And I think that Biden would be remiss not to jump on it. Because what's going on right now, when you look at the police violence, when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, when you look at the kind of unprecedented amounts of non-Black people who are seeking change, I think all that has to do with some kind of reordering of our
Mm-hmm.
country in a very profound way. And so I think, the symbolism, of course, is there. The politics are there. But also, I think the spiritual aspect of our country is fundamentally changing. Now, whether or not it changes for the better remains to be seen. But we are undergoing a major shift to have the
Yes.
coronavirus epidemic as well as the Black Lives Matter, quote unquote, movement or riots happen right after that. That's really a volatile mix. And I think that Biden needs to kind of really speak directly to those two things. Also, when you look at someone like a Trump and all that's going on around him, you really have to kind of compare it to the Reconstruction era, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we had Obama before, and even though Obama was seen as this great symbol for a lot of us in the Black America, he was seen as kind of the beginning of the end for a lot of white folks, right? And so, just like in the Reconstruction era in the South, you had a reaction, a vehement reaction to all this Black progress. And so I think all the police violence you've seen and all the shifts really are a result of this kind of shift that we're coming in as America becomes a more brown and Black nation. So Biden definitely needs to see that, recognize that, and make the proper choice accordingly.
Now, a question came from Pearl Ford Dow, and she asked the question. Let me put it up here for you guys. There it is, right there. Will Biden chase white voters or really attempt to mobilize the base? That's not my question. It's actually from Pearl Ford Dow.
Well, if I may,
Please.
Biden, he must chase what we'll call the moderate white, right? We know that he has to do that. But at the same time, it just makes good political science to say, you have to give your base, maybe Democratic base voters are not eating red meat, right? So maybe base Democratic voters, you have to give them their soy patty. You have to give us what we need. And the number one base, what Biden needs, what he better take is Black women. We know that as Black women go, the Democratic Party. So it makes absolutely no sense. I'm looking at the list. The bottom 8 of those people, it makes as much sense for him to choose those 8 people as it did for Hillary Clinton to choose Tim Kaine for the 2016 election. He's got to take both.
Well, I mean, I want to trouble this notion of what is the base of the Democratic Party, because sometimes I think implicit in this notion of the base of the Democratic Party is that it's white, suburban, or maybe urban to some extent, right? Middle class, educated, etc. But I trouble that a little bit, and this is where, when we look at this through a gendered and race lens, the notion of a base becomes really kind of complicated or troubled, for lack of a better term. So in 2018, 55% of eligible Black women voters voted, far beyond any other group in the U.S. So who is the base, right? Because that to me, that's what that begs. And then the other thing that we need to trouble this notion of the base with is that historically, white women have voted Republican, except in modern times, except for maybe 2 elections. So historically, white women vote Republican. So who is the base, right? So we need to trouble that a lot and change that narrative, that kind of dominant narrative that we see in mainstream media, which tends to make invisible the work Black women are doing for the Democratic Party. Because I would argue the base of the Democratic Party is actually Black women, right? But that's not the dominant narrative. So for me, the question becomes, Well, there are two questions. When we're saying the base, we need to be explicit about who we're talking about. So it's almost like this notion of the base becomes this euphemism to say whiteness, right?
Oh, okay.
Opposed to people who vote for the Democratic Party. And so we need to challenge that. And then we need to really say, what does a gendered race analysis give us in understanding who's coming out to vote? And who's coming out to vote and historically have propped up the Democratic Party in numbers beyond anything that mainstream media is talking about, because of course they tend to make Black women very invisible, would be Black women. And then that changes the narrative, the kind of conversation, the questions that we can demand of Biden around, for example, notions of agenda setting, who should be his running mate, et cetera.
You know, when I was in D.C., he claps. When I was in D.C., I also concur with you that not only are Black women the real base of the party, but if you wanted to do anything in the Democratic Party, and it's been like this for decades, you had to go through a handful of Black women. I used to work for Alexis Herman when she was Secretary of Labor, and every Sunday, I'm talking out of turn here, but they would gather over at, well, I call her my godmother, Dr. Dorothy Irene Heights' house, and they would gather in her house on 7th Avenue, 7th Avenue, yeah, on southwest side of town, and they would get together, and it would be the who's who of Black women in the Democratic Party. When we wanted to go for an opportunity within the Democratic Party, I remember I had to go to Mignon Moore. I worked for Alexis Herman, and Leah Daughtry was my boss. And so Black women have always been, I think, the leadership of the party, but not necessarily recognized by the majority of America. But those four little colored girls who walk around with a book tour, they pretty much ran the party in many instances and do not get the credit. But I think then somehow, some way, the Democratic Party loses the idea or the identity of those who puts people in office. So the question came up today. I mean, I'm going to jump in before I go to issues next. But a person asked the question. They think it should be Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is, by Washington Post, the #1 candidate right now, but she didn't do too well in the primary, and she suffered in the primary. She didn't really get the support, I think, from the groups that she thought she was going to get support from. And one of the issues was the fact that she was a prosecutor in California. Does anybody else concur that it should be Kamala Harris? I mean, she is a Black woman. She is a senator, which has been a common path most recently to becoming president. What do you think?
I agree. I concur. I think that her record as a prosecutor in the Bay Area was not a good one, and she was responsible for locking up a whole lot of Black men, right? So,
right,
she's seen as kind of a walking contradiction, and also it's a bad look that she vehemently attacked Biden for his racism, if you remember during the debates.
Yes.
Right? So now coming on as his possible VP looks like an opportunistic move. I think Susan Rice or Representative Demings out of Florida would be better choices for Biden if he's looking for that type of person. I mean, because even a lot of Black women, don't necessarily trust Kamala Harris's record and her politics.
Anybody else have a different view of Kamala Harris or a similar view? There should be Kamala Harris.
I agree with Professor. I agree with Professor Arthur Amaker.
Yes.
I am troubled, and I did watch the first few Democratic debates, and Kamala Harris did do well. I thought the first debate, she came out, people were very excited about her. She, her name got very well known. She had a bump in the polls, and then the next two debates, it just wasn't good. She was asked about her positions and how they had changed over time. And even from week to week, it seemed as though her position was changing. And I think people kind of lost what it was that she was trying to, do. I guess, you're trying to please too many people. And so she just kind of waffled a little bit. But I think her record is very problematic. I think the information that came out, when her, star kind of rose and she became more popular was not good. And I don't think people in the Black community trust her.
Dr. Lewis Maddox, what do you think? I mean, what are the conservatives saying about Kamala Harris? What are conservatives saying in general about this upcoming election?
Well, so first we have to understand that, there's the way I got to study Black conservatives is because in our field of political science, because 90+% Black people vote Democratic. I guess similar to what Professor Jordan Zachary stated, that Black people who had somewhat conservative views were kind of just disappeared into the backdrop of American politics. And I didn't believe that all Black people got to the Democratic Party through the same path. But at the end of the day, race is a prevailing factor when Black people go to the polls, whether they believe they're conservative or liberal. And so you can't erase race. I mean, it's just like Professor Cornel West says in his book, race matters. And so even for a Black conservative, race matters. And the fact that Biden made the promise that he was going to pick a Black woman running mate. And if he does not live up to that promise, he is going to have a problem with Black women voters, because he did make that promise. And so
did he promise a Black woman or a woman?
Say that again?
Did he promise a Black woman, or did he promise it would be a woman?
I think he believed I think he promised a Black woman. Not just
No. Anybody else concur with that?
I didn't hear him say that specifically. I heard, well, he just said, I think at one point, it's not going to be an old white guy. I think that's what he said.
Well, he did say it would definitely be a woman. But I know that a Black woman had made the case for it to be a Black woman. But still, there's a Latina in New Mexico, and then a white person out of Michigan, a white lady out of Michigan, the governor of Michigan. So he still has a list of people that he's vetting now, and it would make a unique. I don't know. I mean, well, would a Black woman? I mean, are we going to vote Democratic anyway? So that's a question. I mean, that's a real question. Are Black people going to vote for Biden regardless of who he picks as the vice president running mate?
Well,
what do you think?
People have to show up first.
We'll go Dr. Angela, then Dr. Arthur. Go ahead.
Black people have to show up to the polls first before we talk about who they're going to vote for. And that means we have to be motivated to go to the polls. And I'm not sure, I think we're motivated to go to the polls, as one of the professors on the panel said, but are we excited like we were in 2000 when Barack Obama ran for the presidency? And so first, before we even get to that discussion, we need to start talking about whether or not Black people are going to show up at the polls, regardless of who Biden picks, because he can pick someone to make a lot of Black women stay at home. He can pick someone to motivate Black women to show up at the polls and continue to be this strong base of support for the Democratic Party.
Okay. Dr. Arthur, and then we're going to go. Then I want Dr. Julia to jump in on that. Yes.
I think you may see a repeat of a little bit of the last election, where a lot of young people who felt slighted by the Democratic Party, particularly when, a lot of young people wanted to have Sanders, and the Democrats made sure that Hillary Clinton got the nomination, even undermining Sanders during the national convention, right? I think you may see a lot of young people not showing up to the polls at all. Okay, and if that's the case, there could be a possible Republican victory, right? Because if Biden chooses someone that doesn't capture that youthful energy, it's going to be very difficult for him.
Yeah.
Right? So I think a lot of young people are becoming very discouraged with politics in general. And the Democratic Party has to make the case for its existence just as strongly as the Republican Party needs to make the case for its existence.
Okay. Dr. Julia?
So, I'm still waiting for Biden to present an agenda, to present a platform on which he's running and see how he makes the case around a series of issues, longstanding issues in the Black community, brown communities, poor people, etc. And what is particularly key for me, and in talking to other Black women, is what is his, for example, his stance going to be around housing justice, for example, because we're going to be facing a crisis post-corona. Because it started before Corona, but post-Corona,
Yes.
we're going to be really facing a crisis around housing and housing stability. And so what is Biden's plan? And I think his running mate, if Biden can't do it, his running mate ought to have a plan around that. And I think those are some of the issues that will bring people out. If his campaign also has as at the foundation justice and not diversity, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not necessarily, as I can't speak for all Black women, we're not a monolith, but I think our society is past diversity. This notion of diversity, because diversity doesn't always equal equity, and justice. And so Biden has, I believe, has to pick somebody grounded in justice and equity, because his record, particularly pertaining to law and criminal justice, for example, has not been on the side of Black, brown, and poor people. And so if you want to get people excited, whomever he picks has to have that kind of background, I would argue, in order for people to be particularly excited and see his pick not as symbolic, but as substantive, even though we know, for example, the VP might not necessarily influence policy, et cetera, but we're talking about the possibility of this person running for the presidency post-Biden, and that matters. Now, he did promise a woman, and he didn't necessarily, I don't believe, and I'm getting older, and so sometimes the brain does interesting things, but I don't believe he promised a Black woman, he promised a woman. And I really do think that he's going to be in a bind because, and this might trouble some people, society does not take well to educated Black women. Mm-hmm. We saw that with Michelle Obama, for example. Educated Black women, society does not know what to do with us. Period.
I think as a whole, even Black men struggle in that same instance as well. Dr. Kara, is it Kara or Kara? Forgive me.
Kara, yes.
Kara. And I call people by first names, everybody. I'm Pastor Barrett myself. No offense to anyone. But Dr. Kara, we talked about issues, and she mentioned housing, but what about education? How does that fit in the discussion around the vice presidential pick, or even this election for president in general?
I think education is a huge issue, not only because I am a teacher educator, but also I think families saw how important schooling and education is when families had to homeschool their children for 2 to 3 months following the closure of public schools and private schools around the country. Not only that, but early childhood education is a very big issue because it is almost impossible to find, regardless of where you live, a good quality early childhood education program for your child that will allow you to work. We talk about, women being a very important part of the workforce, but unless women are able to know that their children are taken care of, if they are the primary caregiver, it's almost impossible. And I look at my news feed on, my feed on Facebook, and everyone's asking the same question. What is happening in the fall? Am I going to have to homeschool my child? Or I'm homeschooling in the fall. I'm worried about COVID-19. What do I need to do? So education has become a very, very big issue. And I think people have realized how vital schools are, how vital teachers are, and how hard it is to actually keep your children on track. What is the president going to do when, we've had a large number of children out of school for months and months, or if, a part of the population, a significant part of the population is having to work and do childcare at the same time, like I am doing right now. It's very, very challenging. It's very hard. And I would love to see Joe Biden speak on this issue, I think it would resonate with women, with caregivers. A lot of men have had to step up. You have, a lot of families that have had to, do things very, very differently. Move in with grandparents, or have someone else move in to help them, because it's incredible. The work is incredible, just to be able to maintain a job for those of us who were able to maintain working and take care of a school-age child or a young child. I would love to see that addressed.
That's right on point. Doctor, I want to call it Dr. Obey. What are the issues that you're hearing? I mean, you're at a Western Governors, but you also teach at Clark Atlanta. What are you hearing are the issues the most on the top of people's minds right now?
They are still offended that Hillary Clinton pulled hot stove her purse. Okay, that was a joke.
Okay.
She did that in 2016.
Oh.
I agree
Where's
with
it going?
Dr. Njoko Moore. Education is a key policy. You hear students talking about, their health care. When I stand up here and scare them, how are you working your way through school? Oh, I'm working at, Walmart, Amazon factory and whatnot. Oh, do you have health care? No, there's no way I can afford that health care. Well, then you need to, put your seatbelt on, right? Watch out, because remember that the Trump administration this past week is looking to appeal to the Supreme Court to invalidate the Affordable Care Act. Right? Like, they're still doing that right now. If you look, we were talking about whether or not Black people are going to vote Democrat anyway. I think that's true. However, we need to think about how many Black people are actually going to come out. What is the turnout, right? And then specifically, see, when we're talking about policy issues, for me, it all depends on what kind of agenda do you need to proceed from. Black people are not a monolith, so then we wind up needing to divide. Divide might be a strong word. We need to distinguish Black people in particular states. One of the key issues that we need from a vice presidential pick is electability. It is without question that Donald Trump must be defeated, right? He's gotta go. And so that means that because you elect a president in a series of statewide elections, then what we're really talking about is, for example, education policy in places like my focus tends to be on Black communities, right? So how are Black communities in Ohio that we need to come out and turn that swing state blue? What do they feel about education policy? I wanted to really stress the point that when you go to 270 to win, that's a webpage that has certain polls put it in the form of an electoral college map, and then you can go there and play around with the states and see what it takes to get to the 270 for the electoral. 270 to win. I promise you, I'm not getting paid by that website. But when you look at it, Donald Trump can win a significant number of states. He can win Texas, he can win Florida, he can win Wisconsin, he can win Ohio. And if the Democrats hold a few states, and if Democrats win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona, then the Democrats win the election. Therefore, the vice presidential pick that Biden makes has to be significant in those key states. That's enough of that, right?
Can I
Go ahead.
say something? So there's a comment that suggests that thinking about gender and race is not in line with thinking about that people should be motivated to do what's best for the country. And I think there lies the challenge around picking a woman of color, for example, right? That the assumption is that such a selection does not equate for doing what's best for the country, failing to recognize that Black folk and other folk on the margin have always pushed the U.S. to live up to its democratic practices and principles. And that the work that they have done have not been to undermine the U.S., but to actually hold it to the claims that it makes around democracy. And so when you look at how this democratic project called the U.S. has expanded to be a little bit more inclusive, right? at the forefront of that work has been people on the margin. Right? And I think that gets kind of forgotten in people's memories. And so they tend to think that race, if we think about race and gender, that somehow precludes us from actually engaging in the democratic exercise that is the United States. And the two aren't separate.
Two aren't separate. Go ahead.
That, the Black Lives Matter movement is run, it started by Black women. And so we have to keep that in mind in what is going on in our country today. It's really important for us to think about the fact that Black women are leading this social change that's happening in this country, the focus on the least of us, right? Not just Black men, not just all, Black men who are being killed by the police, but they also focus on Black women, Black trans people who are being harmed by the police, and everybody. So they have a very large inclusive umbrella. And so if we think about the Democratic Party and we think about all the different interests that the Democratic Party represents, I agree with Professor Jordan Zachary that we cannot just, put the best interests of the country against looking at race and gender. Once the United States live up to its promises to Black women, then everybody will be included. But we have to think about, look at salary inequities between white men and Black women. Once Black women are lifted up, the entire country will be lifted up.
Hey, can I?
You say the entire country will be lifted up? And break that down to me, for me.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Break that down for me. How's that? So I can understand that.
So if you think about, just look at salary inequities between Black men, white men, black women, Black men, white women, white men. Black women are at the bottom of the salary inequity. The gap between white men pays and Black women pay is the largest gap. If Black women are treated fairly and equitably in this country, then everybody's going to be treated fairly and equitably in this country. Because you deal with race, you deal with racial inequities when you make sure that Black women are treated well and equitably, and you also deal with gender. So the idea of pitting the country against, race and notions of race and gender, I think is an unfair statement that one of your people who are viewing asked the question.
Yes.
Hey,
yes.
Go
ahead. Okay.
Let me back up the doctors real quick. Remember, we all familiar with our Julia Cooper, right? When and where I enter the race interest with me. I don't know what you call it, the commenter in the chat there, right? Folks should be motivated to go to the polls because they want what's best for the country, not what gender or what color the candidates are. Hey, you believe that? I've got this bridge that connects Brooklyn to Manhattan, and you give me $50 and I'll sell it to you. For real, there's a certain amount of fiction, there's a certain amount of folklore, or there's a certain amount of, I'm trying to be gentle, but a certain amount of skullduggery that happens when we teach people about politics and civics. This election is the election to defeat the white supremacist candidate. This is the election to get white supremacy, as far as we can get it, out of the White House. This is the election to defeat Donald Trump. I would submit to our commenter here, glad that he's here, and please jump back in, right? But I would submit to him that gender, race, class, issues of equity, that is all this election is about. Anything else is madness, and I got that least bridge in my court right here.
Well, somebody asked this question here. So what's the difference between justice and diversity? Is it possible to have both? And what would that plan look like? Anybody want to jump on that?
Justice and diversity. That question seems. I would ask her to explain what she means by that. The difference between justice and two completely different concepts. I mean, justice is something that comes either from, the law, from divine justice, right? You have human beings controlling their own community to give justice, and then diversity, quote unquote, is diversity of people who come from different backgrounds who can either work together or not work together. So that's two completely different. So how does I would ask the question, what do they mean by that question?
Well, I'm not sure either, but I think when we were talking, we paralleled what it would be just. Maybe she's saying it may be just to have diversity in our selection and our pick. But I'm challenged to think that I saw one study that said Donald Trump only needs 12% of black people to support him than to have enough impact to win the election. That he's working diligently and hard right now to be attractive to a certain demographic of black people in America. And it appears as though he's actually getting some traction. So is it possible or that Biden could even lose this race?
Well, that's a two-part question, right?
Well, the main question is it possible for Biden to lose this race? I had two parts. I said, yeah.
Anything is possible, right? But
well, black people, will it be enough of a swell of black people to cause Biden to lose the race? How about that?
So let me go back to the 12% of black people voting for Trump. Historically speaking, the Republican Party, from just off the top of my mind, does not nationally ever reach a 12% threshold of black voters. Now, there have been some state, local government races where more than 12% of black people have voted Republican, but nationally, that has not happened. And but stranger things have happened in 2020, right? But I don't believe that that's possible for Donald Trump. Even if he was a different kind of Republican, just can't happen. I would be extremely shocked. I would fall off the chair right now if that was even likely possible. Even if black people don't vote for Biden, they're not going to vote for Trump, not at 12%. That would be a historical record to happen for Republicans nationally.
Anybody think it's possible? Well, take away the 12%. Is Biden going to win?
I mean, according to the polls, as of right now, no, Biden will win. I mean, I think he's polling at like 50% to Trump's 23% or something of that nature, right? The rest independent. I mean, I think at this point, Biden would really have to do something very, very stupid to lose this election. Because I think it's beyond race at this point. I mean, Trump has just turned off so much of his base, right? I mean, with his mishandling of the coronavirus epidemic, the mishandling of the George Floyd riots. I mean, he just has not been doing well. And then sounding not intelligent at all when he speaks. I mean, so many in his own party are turning against him. I mean, I think what you mentioned before, the only way he could win this is steal it, basically, which is not beyond him.
Okay. Dr. Julia, you were smiling, so I know you want to say something. Go ahead.
So I always smile when I hear polls. I think we're kind of far out from the election to be predicting necessarily who's going to win, and who might not. And so I'm always hesitant around those questions about using polls at this point in time, and also using polls. Polls can be very challenging in terms of really tapping into people's truth. Sometimes people give a response that is socially acceptable. I think that Biden could lose this, not necessarily because of the person in the White House, but because of Biden. Biden has yet to present a platform, as far as I'm concerned. There are no clear policies around justice, and this question came back again. So, is he really picking, and here's where diversity versus justice matters. Is he picking a woman because it offers a diverse platform and it appeases people on a basic level? Or is he picking a woman because this individual is going to push a platform around justice and equity? So, for example, diversity will say, has everybody had a chance to speak? justice will say whose thought rises to the top and why. Right? So I always kind of go back to Malcolm X a little bit when he talks about being invited to dinner. Diversity is being invited to dinner, sitting at the table. Justice is actually being able to say, and this is me interpreting Malcolm X a little bit here, but justice is actually having a say about what you get to eat once you're invited at that table. So I oftentimes make fun and I say, I get invited to dinner, and sometimes people don't ask me what I eat. So I'm there and I can't eat. I'm still there. So I don't eat pork, I don't eat a bunch of things, right? But I'm at the table, but I'm not eating.
Right. Right.
And I think black folk, brown folk, poor folk, we have kind of been invited to the table. And I think this is where we're seeing a sea change. People are saying we no longer want to just be invited to the table. We actually want to dine. And not only do we want to dine, but can we actually have a say as to what we are eating? We don't want crumbs anymore, right?
I think that day has been over now. I think the streets have talked loudly. I remember talking about policies, Mr. Biden. I remember I was a Congressional Black Caucus intern, and I was at the home of Congressman John Lewis. He was getting up ready to host the new members, about 12 or 13 new members of the Congressional Black Caucus at his home. And then the phone ringing, and it rang, and he picked up, and they said, it was the President of the United States. It was Mr. Clinton. And Mr. Clinton was in the kitchen. He put, it was a phone on the kitchen wall. That, I'm going back some years. And so Mr. Clinton asked him to support the crime bill. And Mr. Lewis said, there's no way in the world that I'm going to support that crime bill because of the death penalty and how it wasn't unfairly utilized here in America. But one of the authors of that crime bill, those many years ago, was Biden. And if we know anything about that crime bill led to the incarceration of thousands, if not a million, thousands of black men and women. But today, we're talking about policies, and Dr. Julia said he hasn't presented a platform. I think it's really relevant. I don't know about you, but I really want to see what his platform is because Congressman John Lewis became my hero when he told the President of the United States no. First part, the President called his home, and the second part was he told him no, and he stood on his principles. So, what do you think? I mean, how should we be looking concerned about what policies that Mr. Biden selects, or are we just going to be excited to get rid of Mr. Trump and his policies?
Can I try?
Please.
A large part of it, you elect a president, right? But the president, we do our little teaching and we run up on Richard Newstadt's book, Politics of, Persuasion and such. And so essentially, on one level, presidents have power, but they have powers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have power. So really, when you're thinking about who you want to choose as president, you're looking at the team that the candidate builds around. Yes, it is true that Biden was the primary author and helped push the whole notion that young black folks, that would have been me at the time, because we're talking a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And so he's talking about predatory black folks, talking about me and my peoples out here in Brooklyn, right? So yes, he was the primary author of that 1994 omnibus crime bill. However, who does he have around his team? And then the question for voters is, do you think that those people are still pushing those policies, or do you think that those people are around the lines of criminal justice reform, fairness in sentencing, equity, and those types of things? And I would submit, back to our earlier discussion, that Kamala Harris, even though she does have a problematic record when she was Attorney General at California, Kamala Harris is, I think, the strongest candidate for Biden to choose, even on the issue of criminal justice reform. You look at, she's the primary author, I forget the name of the bill right now. They're debating these criminal justice reform right now, and she's the primary author of it. Not only that, is she's out there pushing hard, she's out there fighting and advocating for it. Her, a type of profile that other candidates, other prospective VP candidate don't.
I think another important point is that things that the current president are doing today are worse than the things that Joe Biden did 15, 20, 25 years ago. You know, people can do change, people can and do grow, people can and do learn. But you know, comparing what someone did a long time ago versus what someone is doing today, right now, in their current position, I think is not a good comparison.
But the challenge with that
Well,
is we don't know.
but
I was going to say the challenge with that is that we don't know what Biden is doing. He
that's
hasn't
part of my question.
more, right? So it's less about critiquing what he did in the past, and I suspect that Biden is playing. Well, I shouldn't probably say playing, but game. You know, politics is playing an interesting game of laying low, so that he does not give the current person in the White House fodder for an attack. So it's an interesting game of politics, I think, that's being played now, right? Which is kind of really be below the radar, so that you don't become the punching bag for the current president. But in the meantime, what's happening is that we have nothing to really critique and analyze. Right? So it leaves this vacuum. It leaves this space where the only thing we have is what was done in the past. So his strategy, while is understandable, could also come back to bite him.
I think that's true. We kept you mentioned we mentioned in America we say Mr. Trump has done some horrible things. His policies. What are some of the policies that Mr. Trump has done that's been so bad? I know he set the wall, which never happened. You know he called some people some names, and that's out of tune. But what policies have been detrimental to Black people or American people in general?
Well, if I can chime in on that question, his, I guess, perpetual fight against the Affordable Care Act in the midst of the coronavirus. I mean, that is detrimental to Black people right now. I can't understand why a president who's supposed to care for all the American people would even put up a fight during this most difficult time for Americans.
Right.
That in and of itself is really, it shows what kind of character he has, regardless of what he says. The fact that we're still dealing with this issue of the Affordable Care Act. As if the Supreme Court, stating that it was okay one time wasn't enough.
And to piggyback on what she said, pulling out of the World Health Organization as well. I mean, I think a lot of Trump's issues deal with kind of more incompetency or seeming incompetency rather than policies that specifically are against Black people. I think, because sometimes you can be against someone just by messing up, right? So I think that's kind of what's going on with Trump right now in particular. That's the best way I would say. I can't think of any policy offhand. I know there's been some anti-immigrant sentiments, but we can argue about has the immigrant experience really helped most descendants of American slaves or not? That's a whole different topic, right? But in terms of aggressively against Black people, no. But I would say like she mentioned, the biggest thing is that really trying to trash Obamacare, right? That's one thing, but I mean he's not trying to say specifically against, but also just the incompetency, just the not knowing what he's doing is messing all people up.
He's done a lot of deregulation. I'm sorry. He's done a lot of deregulation of environmental laws. He's pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this affects, we think about who suffers from asthma at the highest rates, who suffers from lack of clean water. We think about eco-justice and environmental justice. That affects everybody, but it predominantly affects communities of color. And so, when we think about lead poisoning and people who have who have been harmed from the environment. Those are decisions that directly affect Americans, people in America, and people of color specifically.
So, and if I can just add,
go ahead.
If I could just add one more, his pick of the Department of Education leadership, Betsy
Yes.
DeVos, and the
Yes.
constant efforts on her part and the Department of Education to refuse to honor public service loan forgiveness when the data indicates that there are more Black people strapped with a larger portion of student loan debt in this country than others. And I mean, it is constant not honoring that policy. So I guess maybe not necessarily a policy that he wrote and made and got pushed forward, but his lack of support for current policies that are in place, are his deciding to pull out of agreements that this country currently has.
So I'll say that policy is also about what's not done. Oftentimes we look at policy only in terms of what's done, and we ignore that choosing not to do something is also a policy, right? And this president has opted not to do a lot of things on a lot of issues, and that is policy. Because what it means is that those individuals don't have access to certain resources, don't have access to certain things that their community need. But the other area that causes great concern for me is what's happening in terms of the justice and the justices that he's appointing and advocating for. Now, eventually, he will leave the White House. Those justices will stay for a while. Right?
I think it would be a good service for people to go to the Brookings Institute and just Google deregulations in the Trump era. When we talk about policies, the big policies in this lack of leadership and whatever variety of ailments that the young man has. Well, he's not a young man, but he's been busy at the EPA, deregulating policies at the EPA. He's been busy with utilities. He's been busy with just a wide variety of deregulations to assist businesses in growing because they feel they've been held back because they've been regulated. And so when we start talking about Trump, I think it's important for us, the big things, I think a lot of things that he does is smoke and mirrors. And I don't count him as not being intelligent. I think he's actually extremely intelligent. I think that if he's not extremely intelligent, then he has people who know his weaknesses and they allow him to speak so they can go do what they want to do in the shadows. And it's been effective in an instance to the detriment of this country. Yes, go ahead.
Pile on some of that.
Yes.
In the final analysis, Donald Trump has taken the rhetoric of white supremacy and he has operationalized it into policy. He took the rhetoric of white supremacy, brought on people who helped build that rhetoric, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, given those people a policy profile and let them go forward and swing, right? This is something I like. When I'm talking to the young folks, right, I need them to be real clear about why their vote really matters, right? Donald Trump has reinvigorated the war on drugs. Donald Trump has taken the Justice Department, removed local police departments away from those consent decrees, and has freed those local police departments to go and continue brutalizing Black and brown people. The Trump administration, I'm gonna go on for a little taste. For a little taste, you wave at me when you want me to stop, right? The Trump administration has appointed. He has just confirmed his 200th federal judge. The type of people that he is appointing to these judges are people who are coming from the Federalist Society list. The Federalist Society is not a group of regular conservatives. They're a group of extreme conservatives coming from the John Birch Society, a group of conservatives who earlier, we're talking like the Rockefeller Republicans of the 50s, they said those John Birch people are crazy. Now they've reorganized themselves into the Federalist Society. They've given the Trump administration a list. He is literally going down that list, and those people are getting confirmed. It is so bad that he's confirming judges to the bench that will not say that Brown versus Board of Education is a decision that they agree on. Let's be clear. To not agree with Brown versus Board of Education is to not agree with desegregation of American life. The Trump administration has, in 2019, he had 69,000 children of illegal immigrants in open air prison camps. Donald Trump has refused to make the the black guy who said that the pyramids were storing grain, right? I can't remember his name. The ex-surgeon who's separated the twins, right? Carlson. He refuses to enforce the Fair Housing Act, right? The Trump administration, then just to bring it back to black folks, the Trump administration is limiting access to immigration from Muslim countries who have very low, if any, history of transporting terrorism, folks like, Muslims out of Tanzania and Sudan, right? Trump administration has given illegal immigrants, okay, not illegal immigrants. When the hurricane happened, the earthquake happened in Haiti, the Obama administration said, hey, it's a problem. You folks need to come to the United States and you can live for a while to reconstruct your life. The Trump administration gave the Haitian immigrants from the earthquake situation a deadline to get out of town, an old school Wild West deadline to get out of town, right? Like midnight, right? So the things that the Trump administration is doing are really clear. Like there is no ambiguity about it. He is taking the rhetoric of white supremacy, turned it into policy. He must be defeated.
So how does this VP help that? I mean, let's go down the list here. I mean, I'm not clear. I mean, Stacey Abrams, they're saying that maybe now she's not in the running or talked about as much. She was advocating to be his choice. Tammy Baldwin, Senator of Wisconsin. Michelle LeJean Grisham, New Mexico. Gretchen Whitmer, Michigan. What about this lady here? Susan E. Rice. What about Susan Rice? Anybody have any perspective on that? And where did her name come from? Excuse me. I know she cursed out. What was his name? Snoop Dogg. But where did she come from in this conversation? And she's ranked number 5 on the Washington Post list.
National security experience.
Do we consider her part of the family? Is she part of the black family?
Yeah, I mean she is. I mean, she worked with Obama. She I think she would be a wise choice in terms of an internationalist view and trying to repair our reputation abroad. Mm-hmm. So I think if he's really trying to give us some kind of policy, international policy, she could articulate that. But I mean, so far I haven't really heard any strong, like Dr. Jordan Jackery said, I haven't heard any strong international policies from Biden either.
Yes.
But yes, she would be a competent choice, definitely.
Hey, if I can, Susan Rice, is she part of the family? I imagine she brings respectable mac and cheese to the cookout, right? I imagine she wobbles with everybody else, but Susan Rice, I think, have wide-ranging respect for her, but I think she brings a certain amount of policy baggage, right? Remember that her national security profile was called into question during the Benghazi incident. And so I think if he chooses her, then they have an automatic attack line that if he chose, I don't know why I'm in the mood today, but if he chose Kamala Harris, they wouldn't have that.
Look at you.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna continue to go down this list here. Susan Rice, well educated. I think she's a brilliant person. I don't know, maybe Keisha Lance Bottoms, Mayor of Atlanta. Her name emerged. What do you think about Keisha Lance Bottoms? She's ranked number 4.
So I was intrigued by her policies around housing. I don't know if but maybe the VP doesn't need to have great name recognition. But she does have some really explicit policies around housing justice and equity. And so that's interesting. Rice, as was stated, would give some kind of thought to foreign policy, which has been devastated by the current administration. And so I think, there is something to be said for Mayor Bottoms, at least from my perspective around her stance on equity and housing.
Now, can someone come from Atlanta? Is not necessarily one of the biggest cities. It's a large city, but not one of the biggest cities. It's a strong mayor position. So I don't believe she's held elected office prior to being mayor. She was an attorney. Does that qualify her? I mean, she's ranked fourth by Washington Post. Does that elevate her to a position of fourth out of these other elected officials? For housing, yes. She fired some police officers immediately, yes. But is that more than enough to make her part of the conversation? Or is she a distraction?
So, I'm smiling because look at the current president. What's his credential to be president?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And you're talking about a bunch of women who had, if not held office directly, most of them have a long history as public servants. Right?
Right.
So does that matter? That they've been part of the fabric of decision making at some point, at some time, whether it's elected or otherwise. And so I don't know, I think that this current president throws a lot, makes us rethink at some level, and this might be a good thing, as to what a politician looks like and the credentials of a politician.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if it's true that people want people outside of Washington, D.C., then some of these individuals are perfect for that because they are outside. And Mayor Bottoms would be outside of D.C., which would bring a fresh face kind of thing, right? If that is really a truth of what the American voting public wants. And so I don't necessarily think that not having a particular history anymore is really something that can hamper anybody at this point. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm hopeful. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Maybe I'm going on a list, but maybe Val Demings. She's was chief of police. She's elected. Now she's elected. Member of Congress. She's from Florida.
Yeah, that would be a very wise choice because you want someone who's been inside of police reform.
Mm-hmm.
She did some interesting things as chief of police in Jacksonville, Florida, from what I understand about her. She's had office now as in the House of Representatives from Florida. She is youngish. She's 63, right? But still young enough to kind of get the young.
It's young in this election.
Yeah, exactly. So that would also help as well. So she has the experience and she has the inside knowledge of how policing works, right, from a police chief officer perspective. Okay, so I think that's, in my view, would put her slightly ahead of someone like all due respect, Kamala Harris, right? Mm-hmm. I think that she's probably the best out of the candidates I've seen so far, and the most realistic. I think it would behoove Biden to do something slightly unexpected. I think people are expecting Kamala Harris, right? But I think that if we look at it, I think that would be probably the best choice out of the ones who presented so far.
Okay. Elizabeth Warren. What, you want to say something about Val Demings?
Real quick, I thought Val Demings was downright impressive. I was one of those that really want the impeachment activity in January. And Val Demings, every time she gave her testimony, she was just flat out good. But can you picture Val Demings in your mind right now? Like what she really look like again? What I'm saying is you really need someone that's going to help motivate voters, a certain amount of electability, a certain amount of popularity. I have no doubt that you'd be really good on the campaign stuff. But the question is, ask some of your young folks, right? Oh, who's Val Demings? They're going to say what? So I think we need to win that Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, to have a chance in Florida, Ohio. I wonder if, essentially a political neophyte, because Val Demings just took office in 2018, right? Her star is rising. But, I don't think that, I wonder if that works.
Elizabeth Warren. She lost. She came in third in the primary in her own state. She has a cult following in some instances. But she's very left. She's more left than Mr. Biden, more progressive than Mr. Biden. What about her? She's ranked number 2, but she's not black. And I know people have been advocating for a black woman, but she's not black. So what do you think about that, Dr. Angela? Elizabeth Warren.
So, I think we have to kind of step back and think about the things that come into place when the presidential nominee picks a VP, right? They have to take into consideration how they can balance the ticket and how they can bring out voters in swing states. And so when we talk about Val Demings in Florida, Florida could possibly go, Democrat, it could possibly go Republican. And so does she have enough political persuasion in Florida to pick up Florida and make it go Democrat in the presidential election? Elizabeth Warren, we know that state normally goes Democrat. So when we look at the list, are we considering the things that will help Biden pick up those states that the Democrats lost in the last election? Will Warren do that? I don't know in some conservative states. In Alabama, where I'm from, I don't think she adds any political capital. So in some of these swing states that are conservative, she won't help him. Now, for people who have taken part in the Black Lives Matter protests, white people who've come on board and understand that we need change in this country, certainly she's a good pick for him. She has the experience. She goes toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. She has very solid, concrete policy proposals. She also has baggage. All of these candidates, if you look hard enough, you will find some things that people may not like. But she's a solid candidate, but she's not a black woman. Will black women be motivated to go out to the polls to support a white ticket? Again, I don't know. Again and again, right?
Right.
I mean, she has the experience, and she can go head to head with Pence or Trump. And I know I've read that Biden said he wanted to pick someone who from day one can lead. She certainly has the experience, but I go back again to what Professor Jordan Zachary stated about the whole idea of whether or not people are qualified. There are constitutional requirements for the person to be vice president. As long as they meet that threshold, they can run. There are no additional requirements except those that we put on there.
Now, before we go to Kamala Harris, the thought is Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump both are above 70. I think both above. Well, Biden will be if he's not above 75, which raised the question, the possibility that if either of them go into the next term, that God forbid they don't complete that second term, or second term for Trump, the first term for Biden. Do you think that comes into the discussion? Should we have that discussion about who could be president from day one in case the seat becomes vacant? In case Biden wins and the seat becomes vacant? Is that part of the discussion when selecting a vice presidential candidate this time around?
I think it needs to. Go ahead, Angela.
No, I just said, Biden has stated in some of the reports that I've read that that's one of the requirements, that he wants someone who can that can take over the seat from day one. So I think that may be something that his camp is considering, but I'm not sure if that's something everyone else will consider, but I will yield.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that Biden is considering that, but the American electorate, I think that might become an issue because the presidential pick is making it an issue, which I find fascinating because 174 and 177, and the 74-year-old is saying that the 77 is too old. But words matter, right? So I think that Biden is paying attention to that, is cognizant of the fact that he needs to pick somebody that people would trust to become president should something happen, right? There was a comment made about, whether or not the person needs some national recognition, and I kind of smile. I'm like, who knew about Sarah Palin? Maybe not the best candidate that was selected, but who knew about Sarah Palin, right? So all this kind of history throws out so much of what we think might be important for the American electorate. And so, it leaves it hard to kind of say this is a criteria he needs to focus on, that is the criteria he needs to focus on, because what we do know with the American public is that the span of attention is short.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to resonate as we get closer to the election would be the issue that is on most people's minds in that moment. And
Right.
it might be the economy. And for some reason, people kind of thought that the current president, was the one to lead the economy. And I think that ultimately what Biden needs to do is he needs to pick somebody. I mean, yes, we care about, the reform of the police and all that stuff, but he needs to pick somebody that has a record around economic growth.
Hey, can I jump in on
You
Elizabeth?
can. When I think about that, I'm trying to go over the record of people. Go ahead. While I think about that.
This election happens in the shadow of three large and significant popular movements, right? First, literally the day after Trump was, there was those women's marches in 2017, right? And those marches did have a political effect because they were followed up by historic gains by women in the 2018 midterm election. That means that women voters are motivated, and they're likely still motivated in 2020. The second thing, we're talking large, significant popular movements that happen, that this election is happening in the shadow of. The second thing is the Me Too movement, right? That good sister Tarana Burke, and the Me Too movement is international in scope, highly politicized women voters in the United States. It is likely that they're still motivated to make it to the polls and use their ballot choices to challenge the sexist language coming out of the Trump administration, Mr. Grabber. The third movement that is happening that's in the shadow of this election is the marches that just happened, right? The Black Lives Matter marches. The world, but especially voters in the United States, were just really affected by looking at George Floyd getting choked to death. What is that? 8 minutes, 46 seconds with a knee on his back. That man calling for his mama in the middle of the street with multiple videos, and the police officers essentially had their hands in their pocket while they were choking that man to death. The barbarism of that is something that will motivate people to vote. So, women's marches, the Me Too movement, the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protest. Is this the time to choose Elizabeth Warren as your candidate? Elizabeth Warren, really? Now she's good. I've watched her campaign. I've had general affection for her policy proposals, but choosing Elizabeth Warren, to our commenter friend, to choose a white woman during the 2020 election could be the same thing as the Republicans nominating Mitt Romney in in 2012, right after the economic collapse. You nominate one of the richest people in the country for your candidate after the economy. Mitt Romney had an elevator to take his card from various levels in his house. And that was the guy you nominated after the economic collapse. That was my argument against. Even though we like Elizabeth Warren, that was my argument against Elizabeth.
Okay.
Yes.
Question for you was I remember the question coming up on the debate floor about reparations. Was Elizabeth Warren wasn't she for it? If I'm not mistaken, she was not against it because they asked Kamala Harris that question. Kamala skated around it, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at the rising movement, right now in Chicago, we recently formed with the mayor's office a reparation commission. Well, now it's a subcommittee, right? In Evanston, Illinois, the town that I'm originally from, there's a successful bill that was passed for reparations. So the groundswell for the reparations movement, led by the ADOS, or American Descendants of Slaves, right, also NCOBRA, has really caught steam. And a lot of people in the Black Lives Matter movement on the fringe of that are supporting reparations. So that's definitely going to be on the agenda. And ironically, none of these black candidates have really addressed that, but Warren did.
Mhm.
So just like we talked about earlier, it's hard in this era that we're in to say that black faces in high places mean progress. I mean, some political scientists will even say that we've gotten worse since there've been black places in high places, black faces in high places because of the corruption, and the whole system needs to be changed. So reparations is on the table. I think that this whole George Floyd incident really has kind of just, and the coronavirus, those two things have showed the inequity in the system here. And Biden would be remiss to not choose a candidate to address that. So Warren may be one of the better candidates for black people. Overall, if you look at it, that may actually end up happening, right? We assume just because Kamala Harris or even Val Demings or whatever, they're of us, when it comes down to who's going to push that HR 40 bill, it may be a person like Elizabeth Warren. So I wouldn't necessarily cringe if he chooses her, right? You have to choose someone, no matter what their race is, who's going to push policies for black people and be unafraid to do it. And sometimes, like with our brother Obama, sometimes a black person tends to be kind of afraid to push those issues that are particularly for black people because they don't want to be seen as radical or too nationalist or whatever. So I wouldn't turn away from Elizabeth Warren. I think Elizabeth Warren is a very good choice, actually.
Now, I'm going to jump in real quick because we keep mentioning that it needs to be a black woman. And you mentioned Obama. Obama was presented to America as the first black president, although Clinton probably would argue with him, but first black president. But he was from a mixed marriage. Was that relevant or not? I don't know. Some people say it is relevant. Other people say it's not. Now, we say we want a black face. You mentioned Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren goes to my friend's church, Mignon Culpepper. She's a member of his church, which is in Roxbury, which is one of the blacker parts of Boston, small Baptist church there. She's a member of that church, and she does support reparations. But she's white. Now, Kamala Harris, she went to Howard University, and she's an AKA, but she wasn't really raised in America. She was raised in Canada. And then she went from Canada.
Her mother's Indian, and I think her father is a lighter
skin. Her mother is Indian. And she wasn't even raised in America. She probably, her older years were in Canada. And then she was born in America, started off in America. High school was in Canada. College was Howard. Back to California. So, I mean, does the black face, is it you mentioned earlier, Dr. Angela, is this symbolic just to have a black face, or do we need someone who has the issues for black people at the forefront of this movement, or does it even matter, or should it be all for a loaded question, or should it be just focus on being American policies? Are we too focused on race when it comes down? This is a real question. Are we too focused on race for the choice of VP?
No, I don't think we're too focused on race. I mean, we do not have a black woman on the Supreme Court yet. Mm-hmm. And we've had a black male president. I mean, I don't think discussing a black woman running as a VP is a wrong thing to do at this point in time. If not now, when? Mm-hmm. Why can't we not discuss this now? Why haven't we been able to discuss it before? It's not like black women have not attempted to run for president of the United States before. So if not now, when? I mean, 10 years from now, would that be the right time? 20 years, 30 years? If not now, when? And so black women are an integral part of this country. And so why can't we have this discussion now? The second part of it is, yes, certainly the person who is running is representing everybody. And substantively, yes, it's very important that that person represent black interests and push the policy agenda for the black community. But yes, it does matter if the person looks like us. Yes, you cannot tell me that going somewhere and seeing someone with black skin, whether you know their politics or not, it's comforting. I mean, once you get to know the person, it may not be so comforting, but descriptive representation does matter. It's nice, even though he doesn't support the Black agenda. If you see a picture of the Supreme Court, having the Black face there is nice. Now, you know, you got to uncover some things, but having this country, Black women were integral to building this country. Why are we not descriptively represented in the government, in the U.S. government, in the cabinet, on the vice presidential ticket? Why not? If not now,
I'm gonna ask it like this: Is Kamala Harris part of the Black experience in America?
but do we really want to talk about Blackness? Who's Black enough? I mean, we had
I'm
this
asking
debate
a
with
question.
Barack Obama. Do we really need to have that discussion? Is that important?
I don't know.
Let me,
Go ahead.
if I can jump in here a little bit, I think that that's a slippery slope to go down. This measure of the temperature of Blackness of individuals. I remember I offered a critique of Barack Obama, and I said he was a tad too conservative for me, and in his politics. And if you would look, for example, at his fatherhood promotion politics, you know, one had to really think from where that was born. This notion of advocating a particular kind of gender politics, and how Black women disappeared in the Obama agenda in the various policies. So, like, if you look at their urban policies, et cetera, this urban agenda that President Barack Obama had, the references to Black women were next to zero. And that's where I'm getting that data from. And when they were mentioned in a particular way about supporting men, which was also fascinating for me. And so this notion of who's Black or who isn't Black, et cetera, is a little bit of a slippery slope to go down. I think it's more important for us to think strategically about who can advance certain issues, and not whether or not this person is part of the Black family. So coming back to Elizabeth Warren, if you look at her record in Congress, has actually advanced more bills than Joe Biden, and has successfully advanced more legislation than Joe Biden.
Yes.
Women can get some stuff done.
In a shorter amount of time.
Yes. As a Black person living in the US, I am more interested in who can get some stuff done, right? Who can move legislation? Who can get people to come on board to support legislation? Who can move it out of committee, for example, right? Because that's what's going to matter at the end of the day. Yes, I believe in substantive representation. When I go into the classroom, for example, and those little heads turn, especially when I'm teaching in predominantly white institutions, and they flip around and they're like, and I smile and they smile, and we know. So substantive representation matters. But we are at the point in America where we need substance, right? We need substance, and we need individuals that can advance substantive legislation. And that's what it boils down to for me, not whether or not the person is Black enough, et cetera. Personal preference, yes, I would love to see a Black woman. Why? Because Black women have been laboring. I think of Mariah Stewart, for example, who stood up and said, you know, what about us? And back in 1860, wherever, 63, I think, right? All the way through Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells Barnett. Just think about how they've been laboring in the cracks of the U.S. society to make this a more just and equitable place. So, of course, one would like to see a Black woman be, you know, in that very public role. But it can't just be any and every Black woman. We have done that for too long, right? And asking that question about who's Black enough, it doesn't get us anywhere. We really need to think about whether or not this person has the wherewithal to advance legislation, but also more importantly, do they have substantive legislation that will change our lived experiences on the ground?
Very good. Before you speak, Arthur.
Ideology.
Say it again.
Oh, I was saying what she's speaking is Blackness is ideology. not necessarily blackness as lineage. We can get caught into where Kamala Harris comes from. I'm more concerned about what is she specifically going to do to help the 30 to 40 million black people in this country, right? So blackness is ideology is what I'm concerned about. In terms of you support things that progress the race. Okay, no matter what your particular if you were born in Nigeria, all that's irrelevant, you know what I'm saying? Because we've had some people who've been foreign born, who've done, from Marcus Garvey to Stokely Carmichael, who've done great things for black people in this country. The first black woman to run, Shirley Chisholm, I think was of Asian descent, if I'm not mistaken, right? Exactly, right?
Yes,
So, that doesn't count someone out. That doesn't count someone out because of that background. What counts is your ideology.
Well, first, let me clear. I was trying to do a loaded question. I only get carried away with it. My real question was to try to get you guys to talk about the question people have been asking is, has her experience, yes, she's black, but has she had a black experience? And the argument is that Elizabeth Warren actually has done a lot for black people and black causes, but she's white. And so is just being a black person enough to qualify you and I think that Dr. Julia kind of answered it as far as, is that enough? And more so what we really want. But I want to give everybody, we're at time, I want to give everybody a chance to go around the room and make your last thoughts on who should Biden pick, and fill it in however you want to around policies, about the individual, about the movement, however you want to close out. This is your statement, and whoever starts talking first can go first, and then we'll just go around the room.
Can I jump in?
Go ahead.
Real quick, right? Okay, so really to back up, I still maintain not that he would choose a black woman just because she's a black woman. Black voters have never chosen people just on the basis of their skin tone. If they were, then folks like Ben Carson would have a better, and Alan Keyes from back in the day, they would have better political careers. Three things to keep in mind, in my view, of what you need to do when you're choosing a vice presidential pick, right? Number one is the ideological balance. The question is whether or not the vice presidential pick makes up for a policy deficit that the leader of the ticket has to allow voters to get on board with the ticket. Joe Biden has a softness with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and so the pick needs to be someone that can shore him up with progressive. A second thing is an increase in electability. So the vice president has to increase the chance that, and I'm going on what I said earlier, that Biden will win. He has to increase the chance that he's going to win Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. He needs to be really competitive. I think it's still a big dream that Democrats win. I'm in Atlanta. I don't think Democrats will win Georgia. I'd love to fall out of my chair like the sister doctor said and be surprised about that. But who can help Biden win in critical key states? And then thirdly, because if Biden wins the presidency, he'll be 78 years old, right? So we want to bless him, right? But what happens if he falls out? The person that he chooses has to be ready on the job on day one. So ideological balance, increase in electability, ready to be president on day one. I promise you, I'm not getting paid by Kamala Harris's team, but I think it's on Harris.
Very good. Very good. Dr. Angela.
He summed
it up? We want to hear from you, though.
Honestly, our objective at this point is to beat Trump. And he needs to pick whomever is on that list to help him beat Trump. And that's the bottom line. However he needs to choose, they need to help him beat Trump. Period.
Mm-hmm. All right, Arthur? Dr. Arthur?
I'm going to say either the two best choices, in my opinion, either going to be Val Demings on one side and Elizabeth Warren on the other side. I think that But one thing to Obey's point, though, is Kamala Harris does have a dynamic personality. And someone with a dynamic personality would definitely show up the youth in a way that maybe those other two candidates wouldn't. But I'm wary of the politics, right? So, yeah, whatever it's going to take to beat Trump, let's do it, right? And I think choosing a black woman definitely, I think, would be the way to go. So if it has to be Kamala Harris, it has to be Demings, let's bring it.
Okay. Dr. Julia.
So I'll say that the vice president matters not in terms of how we're thinking about electability and whether or not they can win states, because historically vice presidents haven't really swayed electability in that way. I think where it matters is if the person will encourage people to come out or versus stay home, as opposed to the importance of winning states. And then I know that's a little bit of a nuanced argument, because you could say it still has an influence about electability. But I don't think vice presidents actually move the barometer in terms of winning certain states. So I think where it matters for Biden is the kind of signaling that he wants to engage in. And, at the end of the day, we could talk about how Black women vote, et cetera. But we have to talk about the hidden face of power, because that's who he's signaling to, right? And that's the base that we don't talk about, that hidden face of power. So whomever he picks he has to ensure that it's not a threat to that hidden face of power. And that's where I think Elizabeth Warren is actually a bit of a challenge, because she does challenge that hidden face of power that's invested in a particular status quo, economic status quo of this country. And so whomever he picks, he has to make sure that they're not perceived as a threat to that group. And those are not elected individuals per se. That's not me as a Black woman. And so it gets tricky, I think, for him, because on the one hand, he wants to signal to the progressive element of the Democratic Party that he's hearing, but he has to temper that by suggesting to those individuals that this individual is not going to disrupt society beyond the point where they're not comfortable.
Yeah.
Hey, Pastor.
Oh, you want to say something?
Yeah, real quick. First, we didn't, or I'll internalize it, I didn't put enough respect on Stacey Abrams' name tonight, because she's another
I was going to do it, don't worry.
that absolutely deserves to be in contention. And then also, I wanted to make sure, I wasn't paying attention to the chat scroll here, but I wanted to make sure that I put a challenge to the person in the chat scroll that we're not going to have that kind of disrespect around here, right? Not with these brothers on the call, right? You're going to put some respect on that sister doctor's name, or else we can have another type of conversation. We're not going to have that. So I wanted to make sure that I checked him on that.
Well, I didn't post it, so on purpose. So.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. I want everybody to see that. I didn't want to.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I didn't put
it like that. Not these days.
It won't be eternalized on this recording. So, I did see that. Well, let me say this. One, I've been for Stacey Abrams since she mentioned that she was interested. Stacey and I were student body presidents at the same time. She went to my favorite college in the world, Spelman College, and so. I was across the way, so I count her as a friend. I still think she would make a dynamic, stupendous vice president, and probably a great president as well. So I want to put that out there, but that's all bias. All right, let me make sure I'm clear. That's all bias. I know I can get my call answered, but anyway. So yes, I want to ask some charged questions, because in America right now we're at a crossroad. It's still not far-fetched for Donald Trump to win the election. Perhaps not by the ballot box, but if Georgia and some other states are any indication how one can mismanage on purpose an election and take an election, then there still remains the possibility that those who want Biden to win can vote in large numbers and still find some way for their votes not to be counted or being cast to the side. And that still remains an issue to this day. That still remains an issue. And so we need to pay attention to that. I do believe that some people thinking about the powers that be that Dr. Julia was referring to. I do believe that Elizabeth Warren, I think she's a great candidate. I think she will bring a lot to the table, but I do believe that there's certain members of Wall Street, the Wall Street segment of society that would, she's already made some statements that they feel uncomfortable with as far as moving forward with her as in that position. But I also believe at the same time that Kamala Harris seems to be getting a groundswell from the black community here. And she is an attractive candidate beyond the black community. And there may be some value in that, in her electability and what she can bring to the table as far as increasing the amount of votes, both with black people and also the majority of Americans as well in the Democratic Party and those liberal voters who find her attractive. And one reason she's attractive is also because she was a prosecutor. And to a certain segment of society, that is a stark advantage because they know that you don't play with crime. But to others who are on the other end of the justice, that still remains a relevant issue that I think will not go away as we go dealing with the outcomes from the Black Lives Matters movement and going forward. We talk about Benghazi for like a Susan Rice. Well, being a prosecutor in America is still a Benghazi for anybody who's been a prosecutor before. We can't go away with that. That's still going to remain a conversation piece. It's not something she can't overcome, but it's something she's going to have to deal with going forward. And so I thank you all for coming out and having this conversation. The word on the street that I got a text from people in the know today, they told me don't quote them on this. They say he's going to go with Kamala Harris. So we'll see what happens if those in the know are accurate in their hearing or assessment of the issues. All right. Thank you all. Oh, before we go, Dr. Julia, matter of fact, I should have done this for everybody. Everybody tell us about your book, one of your books, and where we can find them.
So most recently, I have a co-edited, Lord, I forgot the name of the book, Black Girl Magic Beyond the Hashtag with Dr. Duchess Harris. And that book looks at how Black women make space and make the work that they do real. And so it removes the notion of Black Girl Magic off of the digital platform and into real life, asking how is it that Black women do the magic, not hocus pocus, but the magic necessary to make themselves real and to achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve, which is justice, for example. Thank you for that opportunity.
Excellent. And if you don't want to highlight the book, just tell us how we can reach you. Dr. Anderson, you have an interesting book. Tell us about that.
So my book is, the title is Conservatism in the Black Community to the Right and Misunderstood. And the book is really about demystifying this whole idea of Black people who vote Democrat but have conservative thoughts. And it's actually disentangling them from those Black conservative elites that we think about all the time, like Clarence Thomas, or Deneen Barelli. And so I talk about Black conservatism in the Black community, and I do focus groups where I talk to these people to try to understand what their views are. You can find it on Amazon, but I prefer for you to support a Black business to find my book.
Okay. All right. Very good. Two gentlemen.
The last time I published on this particular issue of politics was Third World Press put out a book on the Trump administration called Not Our President. If you go to thirdworldpressfoundation.com, okay, you can find it there. I have an essay there called Surprises That Are Not Surprises, in which I analyze how Trump won the first election. I'm also currently working on a novel, which I hope to get published by next year. And also, if you want any of my information, go to Professor Amaker Speaks on Facebook. Put that in, and my page is there, Professor Amaker Speaks.
Amen. Dr. Obe, how can we get in touch with you? Or do you have something for us to find?
You know, my usually use words like manuscript under production these days, but you know, just like the hip hoppers, the rappers told, I am dropping my demo around to the various companies. I've written the piece I've written a piece, it's an analysis of world systems theory using the Cold War as context to compare the civil wars of Angola and Ethiopia from the 70s up to the end of the Cold War, the 1989, 1990s and so. But, we'll see who offers the best deal, where that comes. We'll see about that. But I'm on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is Prof. Lee Jones, at Prof. Lee Jones, and I invite folks to. I'm not exactly as opinionated on Twitter as I am now, but I would invite folks to.
Amen. And you all can find me every Sunday at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. here at EmpowerLiving.Church. I write and say every week.
Barry. Thank you.
Every week. Matter of fact, I write 2 of them every week. Amen. All right. Thank you all for joining us. We'll come back again next Sunday with another Leadership Talks. We have a pastors roundtable next week, and we'll continue this dialogue until he picks a VP. We're going to talk about this thing. Maybe. All right. Thank you all. Have a blessed evening.
Thank you. All right.
Yes. Bye-bye. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Come back next week, Sunday at 7 o'clock for Leadership Talks.